Motor development. 4.6. Describe dynamic systems theory of motor development, along with factors that influence motor progress in the first 2 years. Carolyn, Monica, and Vanessa each kept a baby book, filled with proud notations about when their children first held up their heads, reached for objects, sat by themselves, and walked alone. Parents are understandably excited about these new motor skills, which allow babies to master their bodies and the environment in new ways. For example, sitting upright gives infants a new perspective on the world. Reaching permits babies to find out about objects by acting on them. And when infants can move on their own, their opportunities for exploration multiply. Babies' motor achievements have a powerful effect on their social relationships. When Caitlin crawled at 7.5 months, Carolyn and David began to restrict her movements by saying no and expressing mild impatience. When she walked 3 days after her first birthday, the first testing of wills occurred. Despite her mother's warnings, she sometimes pulled items from shelves that were off limits. "I said, don't do that," Carolyn would say firmly, taking Caitlin's hand and redirecting her attention. At the same time, newly walking babies more actively attend to and initiate social interaction. Caitlin frequently toddled over to her parents to express a greeting, give a hug, or show them objects of interest. Carolyn and David in turn increased their verbal responsiveness, expressions of affection, and playful activities. And when Caitlin encountered risky situations, such as a sloping walkway or a dangerous object, Carolyn and David intervened, combining emotional warning with rich verbal and gestural information that helped Caitlin notice critical features of her surroundings, regulate her motor actions, and acquire language. Caitlin's delight as she worked on new motor skills triggered pleasurable reactions in others, which encouraged her efforts further. Motor, social, cognitive, and language competencies developed together and supported one another. The sequence of motor development. Gross motor development refers to control over actions that help infants get around in the environment, such as crawling, standing, and walking. Fine motor development has to do with smaller movements, such as reaching and grasping. Table 4.2 shows the average age at which U.S. infants and toddlers achieve a variety of gross and fine motor skills. It also presents the age range during which most babies accomplish each skill, indicating a large individual difference in rate of motor progress. Also, a baby who is a late reacher will not necessarily be a late crawler or walker. We would be concerned about the child's development only if many motor skills were seriously delayed. Historically, researchers assumed that motor skills were separate, innate abilities that emerge in a fixed sequence governed by a built-in maturational timetable. This view has long been discredited. Rather, motor skills are interrelated. Each is a product of earlier motor attainments and a contributor to new ones, and children acquire motor skills in highly individual ways. For example, before her adoption, Grace spent most of her days laying in a hammock, because she was rarely placed on her tummy and on firm surfaces that enabled her to move on her own. She did not try to crawl. As a result, she pulled to a stand and walked before she crawled. Babies display such skills as rolling, sitting, crawling, and walking in diverse orders, rather than in the sequence implied by motor norms. Motor skills as dynamic systems. According to dynamic systems theory of motor development, master of motor skills involves acquiring increasingly complex systems of action. When motor skills work as a system, separate activities blend together, each cooperating with others to produce more effective ways of exploring and controlling the environment. For example, control of the head and upper chest combine into sitting with support. Kicking, rocking on all fours, and reaching combine to become crawling. Then crawling, standing, and stepping are united into walking. Each new skill is a joint product of 4 factors. 1. Central nervous system development. 2. The body's movement capacities. 3. The goals the child has in mind. And 4. Environmental supports for the skill. Change in any element makes the system less stable, and the child starts to explore and select new, more effective motor patterns. The broader physical environment also profoundly influences motor skills. Infants with stairs in their home learn to crawl upstairs at an earlier age and also more readily master a back descent strategy. The safest but also the most challenging position because the baby must turn around at the top, give up visual guidance of her goal, and crawl backward. And if children were reared on the moon with its reduced gravity, they would prefer jumping to walking or running. Look and listen. Observe a newly crawling or walking baby. Note the goals that motivate the baby to move, along with the baby's effort and motor experimentation. Describe parenting behaviors and features of the environment that promote mastery of the skill. When a skill is first acquired, infants must refine it. For example, in trying to crawl, Caitlin often collapsed on her tummy and moved backward. Soon she figured out how to propel herself forward by alternatively pulling with her arms and pushing with her feet. Belly crawling in various ways for several weeks. As babies attempt a new skill related, previously mastered skills often become less secure. As the novice walker experiments with balancing the body vertically over two small moving feet, balance during sitting may become temporarily less stable. Motor mastery involves intense practice. In learning to walk, toddlers practice 6 or more hours a day, traveling the length of 29 football fields. They fall, on average, 17 times per hour, but rarely cry, returning to motion within a few seconds. Gradually, their small, unsteady steps change to a longer stride, their feet move closer together, their toes point to the front, and their legs become systematically coordinated. As movements are repeated thousands of times, they promote new synaptic connections in the brain that govern motor patterns. Dynamic systems theory shows us why motor development cannot be genetically determined. Because it is motivated by exploration and the desire to master new tasks and varies with context, heredity can map it out only at a general level. Rather than being hardwired into the nervous system, motor behaviors are softly assembled from multiple components, allowing for different paths to the same motor skill. Dynamic motor systems in action. To find out how infants acquire motor capacities, some studies have tracked babies from their first attempts at a skill until it became smooth and effortless. In one investigation, researchers held sounding toys alternatively in front of infants' hands and feet, from time they showed interest until they engaged in well-coordinated reaching and grasping. As figure 4.11 illustrates, the infants violated the normative sequence of arm and hand control preceding leg and foot control, shown in table 4.2. They first reached for toys with their feet as early as 8 weeks of age, at least a month before reaching with their hands. Why did babies reach feet first? Because the hip joint constrains the legs to move less freely than the shoulder constrains the arm, infants could more easily control their leg movements. Consequently, foot reaching required far less practice than hand reaching. As these findings confirm, rather than following a strict sequence, the order in which motor skills develop depends on the anatomy of the body part being used, the surrounding environment, and the baby's efforts. Furthermore, in building a more effective dynamic system, babies often use advances in one motor skill to support advances in others. For example, beginning to walk frees the hands for carrying, and new walkers like to fetch distant objects and transport them. Observations of new walkers reveal that, surprisingly, they fall less often when carrying objects than when their hands are empty. Toddlers integrate their objects carrying into their emerging walking system, using it to improve their balance. Cultural variations in motor development. Cross-cultural research further illustrates how early movements, opportunities, and a stimulating environment contribute to motor development. More than half a century ago, Wayne Dennis observed infants in Iranian orphanages who were deprived of the tantalizing surroundings that induce infants to acquire motor skills. These babies spent their days lying on their backs in cribs without toys to play with. As a result, most did not move on their own until after 2 years of age. When they finally did move, the constant experience of lying on their backs led them to scoot in a sitting position rather than crawl on their hands and knees. Because babies who scoot come up against furniture with their feet, not their hands, they are far less likely to pull themselves to a standing position in preparation for walking. Indeed, by 3 to 4 years of age, only 15% of the Iranian orphans were walking alone. Cultural variations in infant rearing practices affect motor development. To ensure safety and ease toileting while parent works in the fields, mothers in rural northeastern China place infants on their backs in bags of sand, similar to kitty litter, for most of the day. Continuing this practice into the second year, compared with diapered infants in the same region, sandbag-reared babies are greatly delayed in sitting and walking. Among the Sinacanteco Indians of southern Mexico and the Gusii of Kenya, adults view babies who walk before they know enough to keep away from cooking fires and weaving looms as dangerous to themselves and disruptive to others. Sinacanteco and Gusii parents actively discourage infants' cross-motor progress. In contrast, among the Kipsigis of Kenya and the West Indians of Jamaica, babies hold their heads up, sit alone, and walk considerably earlier than North American infants. In both societies, parents emphasize early motor maturity, practicing formal exercises to stimulate particular skills. In the first few months, babies are seated in holes dug in the ground, with rolled blankets to keep them upright. Walking is promoted by frequently standing babies in adults' laps, bouncing them on their feet, and exercising the stepping reflex. As parents in these cultures support babies in upright postures and rarely put them down on the floor, their infants usually skip crawling, a motor skill regarded as crucial in Western nations. Finally, because it decreases exposure to tummy time, the current Western practice of having babies sleep on their backs to protect them from SIDS delays gross motor milestones of rolling, sitting, and crawling. Regularly exposing infants to the tummy-lying position during walking hours prevents those delays. Fine motor development, reaching and grasping. Of all motor skills, reaching may be the greatest role in infant cognitive development. By grasping things, turning them over, and seeing what happens when they are released, infants learn a great deal about the sights, sounds, and feel of objects. Because certain gross motor attainments vastly change infants' view of their surroundings, they promote manual coordination. When babies sit, and even more so when they stand and walk, they see the panorama of an entire room. In these positions, they focus mainly on the sights and sounds of nearby objects and want to explore them. Reaching and grasping, like many other motor skills, start as gross, diffuse activity and move toward mastery of fine movements. Figure 4.12 illustrates some milestones of reaching of the first 9 months. Newborns make poorly coordinated swipes, called pre-reaching, toward an object in front of them, but because of poor arm and hand control, they rarely contact the object. Like newborn reflexes, pre-reaching drops out about 7 weeks of age. Yet these early behaviors suggest that babies are biologically prepared to coordinate hand with eye in the act of exploring. At about 3 to 4 months, as infants develop the necessary eye, head, and shoulder control, reaching reappears as purposeful. Forward arm movements in the presence of a nearby toy and gradually improves in accuracy. By 5 to 6 months, infants reach for an object in a room that has been darkened during the reach by switching off the lights, a skill that improves over the next few months. Early on, vision is freed from the basic act of reaching so it can focus on more complex adjustments. By 7 months, the arms become more independent. Infants reach for an object by extending one arm rather than both. During the next few months, infants become more efficient at reaching for moving objects, ones that spin, change direction, and move sideways, closer or farther away. Once infants can reach, they modify their grasp. The newborn's grasp reflex is replaced by the ulnar grasp, a clumsy motion in which the fingers close against the palm. Still, even 4 to 5 month olds modify their grasp to suit an object's size, shape, and texture, to distinguish, for example, rigid versus soft, a capacity that improves over the second half year as infants adjust the hand more precisely and do so in advance of contacting the object. Around 4 to 5 months, when infants begin to sit up, both hands become coordinated in exploring objects. Babies of this age can hold an object in one hand while the other scans it with the fingertips, and they frequently transfer objects from hand to hand. By the end of the first year, babies use the thumb and index finger opposably in a well-coordinated pincer grasp. Then the ability to manipulate objects greatly expands. The 1-year-old can pick up raisins and blades of grass, turn knobs, and open and close small boxes. Between 8 and 11 months, reaching and grasping are well practiced, so attention is released from the motor skills to events that occur before and after attaining the object. For example, 10-month-olds modify their reach to anticipate their next action. They adjust their arm and hand to catch a ball, and they reach for a ball faster when they intend to throw it than when they intend to push it down a narrow tube. Around this time, too, infants begin to solve simple problems that involve reaching, such as searching for and finding a hidden toy. Finally, the capacity to reach for and manipulate an object increases the infant's attention to the way an adult reaches for and plays with that same object. As babies watch what others do, they broaden their understanding of others' behaviors and the range of actions that can be performed on various objects. Ask yourself. Connect. Provide several examples of how motor development influences infants' and toddlers' social experiences. How do social experiences in turn influence motor development? Apply. List everyday experiences that support mastery of reaching, grasping, sitting, and crawling. Why should caregivers place young infants in a variety of walking time body position? Reflect. Do you favor early systematic training of infants in motor skills such as crawling, walking, and stair climbing? Why or why not?